Dear ICCS member and ICCS friends, on behalf of the ICCS, the Italian Chamber of Commerce in Singapore's board, welcome to today's webinar organized in partnership with SGCM Capital. In 2021, the Chamber celebrates its 30th anniversary of activities. A great milestone which was achieved thanks to the value proposition, the seriousness of our value proposition, and thanks to the support of a growing Italian business community in Singapore. Today, we account roughly 200 members, which are spread across all industry and business sectors. That's very powerful. And that's why today we are able to gather together with powerful speakers. We are going to start, I will going to hand over the floor very soon to the MD, the Managing Director of Clerici, Giacomo Clerici, who's also the Vice President of ICCS. He will be followed by Filippo Gotti, who's the branch head of NI and other supporting members of the Chamber. Then it will be the time for Tim Kozulic, the Managing Director of Fratelli Kozulic, who's also the ICCS Shipping President. We will have then Gu-Yun Chang, the Global Head Development for Enel. And last but not least, it will be the time for Massimiliano Bondurri, who's the CEO and founder of SGCM Capital. Now, coming to today's topic, which is very timely, considering that today is Earth Mother Days, energy is pivotal to our lifestyle and our business. 80% roughly of energy supply is obtained thanks to fossil fuel, 10% from biofuel, 5%, believe it or not, from nuclear is coming back, and 5% from renewable energies, which are ramping up. If we put that in metrics, considering that the global world GDP, gross domestic product, is roughly 87 trillion US dollar, traditional energy supply accounts for over 7 trillion, whereas renewable energies account for 1.5 trillion, but growing. That's also quite interesting. Before leaving the floor, the virtual floor, some thoughts which can also lead to some questions from a recent survey and report from McKinsey Energy. Firstly, the pandemic crisis is going to shape the way energy investments are going to be done, considering all the stimulus packages that the several governments are putting in place. Secondly, despite the disruption and despite all the effort and the business transformation in the energy, it might be possible that we won't match the quite ambitious target of the Paris Agreement 2050 to reduce 1.5 Celsius degrees the temperature of Earth. What can we do more? Thirdly, when it comes to traditional source of energy, it looks like some start to reckon that oil production is going to peak in 2029. It's just behind the corner. And when it comes to gas, somebody thinks it's going to happen in 2037. What can we do? In terms of renewable energies, then, let's bear in mind that this is 1.5 trillion, only 5% of the global supply, but is ramping up massively. And some plants aim by 2035 to cover 50% from the 5 current production. And last but not least, being a banker myself, the report allude to the current trend in sustainable investor. Private clients, institutional clients, corporations, they want to invest more and more in sustainable products and securities. How this is going to help and how it's going to shape the energy in the future. So without any further ado, I leave now the virtual floor to Managing Director and Vice President of ICCS, Giacomo Clerici. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alberto, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. Let me just introduce myself. So my name is Giacomo Clerici. I work for an Italian company called Clerici. We started to do business in 1895, so quite a while ago. And we start by importing coal, C-O-A-L, black, dirty, and not very popular nowadays. And we did that in the port of Genoa. So that's how we start. But then we decided to become a trader because we saw some opportunity in that space, which means you buy and you sell on your own name, and you take the credit risk, the political risk, the logistical risk, and the quality risk, and we move on. But then we realized that to be relevant, still relevant in that specific space, we had to invest in something, and that's why we decided to move and bought some vessel first, then some transshipper, and finally a coal mine in Russia in 2008. But the market changed again, and as you all know, popular is not very popular anymore. So we realized that we had to diversify our business and to move and to look at the longer term. So that's why we are looking at LNG, which will be the fossil fuel of transition to renewable. But I think Filippo here with us will tell us more about it later on. And we also bought a machinery company, which is a totally different business in the converting industry. And we are like cutting big roll, big coils up to 12 meters wide into smaller one. So that just to make a quick presentation. Coeclerici, head office in Milano, three main business, machinery, the mine, and the trading in Singapore. And we employ around 1,200 people. So back to the topic of energy, I think I know about coal, no? And I have a few points I would like to make about this specific source of electricity. So the first point is like, why do we need coal? So there is two ways we can use coal. And the first one is for electricity, and this is steam coal. And the second one is to produce steel, because steel is iron ore and coal. And that's something people doesn't always know about. So just to give you a rough idea, we got 80% is steam coal and 20% is metallurgical coal. The second point I would like to make is, and I think Alberto already touched on this one, if you look at the electricity sector, not the energy, but electricity specifically, so we still have 40% produced by coal, 40%, so it's 40. So that's a large part of the electricity which is still produced by coal. So we're hearing a lot on the newspaper, especially in Europe and in the US and Singapore, about the end of coal, which will happen, we're sure, and we're working on that. But as of now, it's still a very important source of electricity. So what we are seeing is like a movement. So you got in Europe and in the US, people are getting out of coal. But all this downgrade on one side is going into Asia. And that's what's happening. And I think it's quite natural to see that, no? And it's part of the evolution, no? So I think as European, we grow with coal, and that's how we manage to be a developed country. So that's how we built our manufacturing industry. And now we have the money to subsidize, to give some grant, and to finance the transition to renewable energy. And that's what should happen in Asia, even if we all know we don't have too much time. But we saw this in China. I think, I don't know if you remember it, but 5 years ago, at one point, everyone was talking about the air quality in Beijing, no? And that's when the politicians start to act and try to move on that direction. The same story happened in India. 2 years ago, on all the newspaper, we were talking about the air quality in New Delhi. And also India started to move on that direction because the population started to think about the air quality. But let's remember that there is still 1 billion people which doesn't have access to electricity. And these people, they just want electricity. They're not looking at the air quality or other things. The third point I would like to make is about storage. And I think it's very important to look at renewable energy. But the problem with renewable energy is how to store the electricity. Because if there is no sun, no wind, no water, what do? You need to have some spare capacity. So as of now, you got batteries, but they're still not very efficient, still very expensive, I should say. So it will take some time to get something very efficient. So that's why you still need to have some fossil fuel, gas or coal, to have a spare capacity, which is easy to store and easy to turn on the turbine and the power plant. And the last point I would like to make is about, that's a personal question I have to everyone. And I think we're talking a lot about renewable, no? And but on one point, coal is still quite very natural. So it's something in the ground, you burn it, it creates CO2. CO2 is what they told us when I was at school, is very good for the plants to create oxygen. Now they're telling us it's really bad, but I'm not saying coal is good. I'm just saying this is natural. And on the other side, with renewable, there is a problem with how you mine all these new materials, no? Cobalt, lithium. And what do you do with all this battery? No? The recycling problem of all these materials, I think, will be very important, because I hope we will not try to solve one problem to create an even bigger one, like we did with plastic, just to give you an example. Having said that, I think we're on the right direction with renewable and try to go on a greener world to leave to our kids. So we're all working on that direction. And I leave the floor to my friend Filippo, who tell us the transition with LNG. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Giacomo. Thank you, Alberto. Thank you to SGMC Capital and the ICCS for having us here today. So I'm Filippo Gotti. I'm in charge of LNG business development on a global basis for Eni, and I'm the GM of Eni Global Energy Markets here in Singapore. And what I would like to do today is maybe give you a highlight of what LNG is, and potentially go through what the role of natural gas is in the energy transition. So LNG is natural gas. Very simply put, it's liquid natural gas. It's natural gas which is liquefied through a refrigeration process, which brings it at minus 160 degrees centigrade. And through that process, you reduce the volume to 1/600th of its volume in gaseous form, and therefore you make it transportable. So what we generally do at Eni is we have here in this region, we have production offshore in Indonesia. We produce gas, we transport it by pipeline to a liquefaction plant. We put the LNG on a ship. The LNG goes to an end market like China. It goes through a regasification process, and it then flows into the pipelines to the downstream market into China. Now, LNG has been around for a long time. The first cargo was done in the 1960s from Algeria, but it has really been in the past decade or maybe 15 years where it really took off. And now it has become really a very, very powerful, let's say, commodity in the energy space. To give you an idea, over the past 10 years, the average investment in LNG was around $50 billion per year. So very, very sizable and very actually exciting commodity to be a part of over the past decade. So LNG is gas, and gas, as we said, is very important in the energy transition. Why is this? It's going to be the last fossil fuel to be burnt on this planet. This is what we all believe. It should be the fossil fuel that will, let's say, accompany this energy transition process on the number of sectors. And what I would like to do is maybe go through these sectors and understand how, gas can play a role in these sectors. As Giacomo was saying before, gas is one of the key sources for power generation, so electricity. And I guess there's two trends here to highlight. The first one is coal to gas switching. And while it is true that, of course, a large portion of power generation is absolutely run on coal, and the fact that there's still actually new power plants being built, coal-based power plants being built in many countries, it is true that the vast majority of new power plants are gas power plants, especially in developing countries like, or I don't know if we should call them developing countries anymore, but especially in China, in India, Southeast Asia, certainly there's a very big push for coal to gas switching. And that represents around 40% of the demand of gas. The second element is big effort on renewables, and huge investments are being thrown into this sector. But as we all know, the key characteristic of renewables is intermittency, it produces power only when the sun shines and when the wind blows. Of course, there's a lot of things to be done, which are, let's say, being done to mitigate this issue, and I'm sure Guyun will talk about it at length. But certainly, gas is known and recognized to be the ideal partner to renewable development. So it should be always within an energy mix, or at least until new sources of energy come into play, or until we solve the battery problem. It should be always be in the energy mix to manage this intermittency and balance out the electricity production. The second sector is industrials, and actually the industrial segment is the one where we see the most growth in gas demand. This is industrial processes, refineries, petrochemicals, fertilizer production, which not many people know about, and it's gas. It's fertilizers is a huge center of demand for gas, and in these processes you're competing against diesel and heavy fuel oil mainly to switch and basically generate from a cleaner and in most cases cheaper source. The third is transportation. So we said that I guess there's two parts of this. On one hand, you have gas as a fuel for power generation. So a lot of the electric vehicles in the future will actually be indirectly powered through gas because it is generating the power that fuels them. But then, of course, gas is a fuel in its own right. So you've got CNG, which has been very popular in Italy for many years. But also, for example, in India, where all the auto rickshaws, the so-called tuk-tuks, are run on CNG. But more importantly, LNG, which over the past few years has acquired huge relevance, and where I'm sure Timothy will talk about it more, but it has huge potential as a fuel both for heavy road transport like trucks and shipping. And this is happening all over the world, both in the advanced, let's say, Europe and the US, as well as China, for example, and many other countries. Last but not least, residential and commercial. Our houses, the gas for cooking, and for heating. Couple of trends. You've got conversions of boilers, especially, for example, in China for heating, where they're switching from coal to gas. So there's a lot of that happening, and that's going to represent a big portion of growth in demand there. And then for cooking, for example, I would say India, where a large part of the population is actually cooking on LPG, and there's a shift from LPG to gas. The LPG is liquid petroleum gas. Or in Italian GPL. So that's of course, in Europe and the US, the dynamics are a little bit different because it's more advanced. So yes, there is a lot of electric cooking, and there's a big push for that. And there's also potentially electric heating systems. But I guess in the developing world, it's a little bit harder it's going to take a little bit more time to get to that stage. So huge potential for gas as a transition source within these sectors. And demand is certainly increasing, or at least expected to increase for a few years to come, with LNG being at the center of this growth, thanks to the fact that actually most of the countries where there's huge growth, such as China, India, Southeast Asia, are not, let's say, do not have enough domestic gas sources to fuel this growth. So actually they have to import gas, and they're not connected to big, let's say, pipeline producers, pipeline gas exporters such as Russia or Libya in the case of Europe. So they have to import LNG. Last but not least, I may be running over time. I would like to say that, of course, we all realize that actually when you go through a combustion process, gas does emit GHG, greenhouse gases, and actually, although it's 50% less than coal and around 20 to 30% less than petroleum products, we are doing a lot to make sure that we guarantee a sustainable future for our business at Eni, targeting carbon neutrality of our operations by 2050. Now that sounds like a long time away, but actually, we have defined some very clear milestones to get there, and we're doing a lot on this front. For example, we are investing in carbon capture and storage, which will compensate for the emissions that our products generate. We're investing heavily on REDD+ projects, which are reforestation, forest conservation projects, which again serve as an offset for the products that we produce. And then we're doing a lot of work on biorefineries. These are huge investments, which is obviously another topic, but very much geared toward the sustainable net zero world. Biogas, the circular economy, and I would say probably that's it. That's the panorama of activities that we're looking at. So the industry is very conscious of the impact that it's having on the planet, and there's a big push to make sure that we guarantee a sustainable energy transition. But we also have to recognize, the way the world is developing and where you need to get your energy from, where it's more sustainable, cheap, and let's say efficient to get your energy from. So I hope this gave you a good overview of where gas stands in the world of energy today, and yeah, look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Timothy.
Thank you. Thank you, and apologies, first of all, for my voice. If any of you has kids, you know how effective they are in bringing germs and viruses at home. Thank you to our host today. It's a pleasure to be here in this very nice settings. My name is Timothy Kozolic. I'm the CEO of Fratelli Kozolic. We are also, like Giacomo's business, we are a family business, relatively old. We celebrate 164 years this year, still 100% family owned, and we are now about to welcome actually the 7th generation in the business. We are involved in different aspects of shipping, from ship owning to ship management. We do freight forwarding, we do ship agency, marina management, we provide services to yachts, and then we have a relatively sizable business that has to deal with fuel. So we are a fuel trader, and at the same time we're also a physical supplier. We in Singapore specifically, we have a fleet of about 7 tankers that transport fuel oil from an oil terminal to a ship that then will use that as a fuel. So the fuel industry is definitely an industry where we're involved, and we are really seeing how we're about to face a big transition and a big disruption. What I would like to talk about today is building on what Filippo and Giacomo just shared, the perspective from the shipping industry. So the shipping industry, first of all, you have about 70 to 80,000 ships in the world. And of these 70 to 80,000, you have roughly 95% that are fueled by residual fuel. So the fuel oil, which is in the refining process, is basically the dirtiest type of fuel that you can have. Obviously, there is now a push for a change. But the shipping industry has proven to be quite resilient and resistant to change over time. I think I'm not exaggerating if I say that the last real change, technological change that the shipping industry has seen was the move from phone to internet. Since then, nothing really happened, nothing meaningful happened in terms of technological advancement. We are still working exactly the same way we used to work 20, 50 years ago. Of course, the shipping industry, like many other industries, will go through a disruption, a phase of disruption, which is mostly driven by technological aspects as well as environmental considerations. Now, talking about the environment, of course, we have the two sides, because you have the demand side as well as the supply side. And Filippo, of course, being mostly from the supply side, covered LNG specifically. But of course, if you look at it from the demand side, you have this fleet of 70 to 80,000 ships that are floating, and they're not gonna sink just because we're gonna change the type of fuel that we use. So there has to be a sort of a sustainable way of implementing this change. The shipping industry is governed by an entity called IMO, the International Maritime Organization, which has proven to be a little bit toothless in some cases because, of course, enforcement is not always easy. They set two important targets. The first target is that by 2030, there should be a reduction of 30% in greenhouse gases emissions compared to 2008. The second target is that by 2050, that reduction has to be 50%. Now, this is a very ambitious goal. Whether it's achievable or not, of course, it's a bit of a question mark. But in order to get there, we need to go through a transition phase as an industry, which will probably go through the implementation of LNG, and that will bring us to the use of different fuels. So currently, we have about, I believe, 200 ships in the world that are LNG powered. So it's a small percentage, as you can see. However, if you look at the order book for new builds, that percentage is quite significant. We are talking about 30% approximately of the order book that is represented by LNG ships, LNG power ships. LNG, however, is not really the solution. So as mentioned by both Giacomo and Filippo, we all expect LNG to be a transition solution, which will take us to then the use of other fuels. What are the candidates? At the moment, there isn't really one clear winner. We see shipping companies testing and experimenting together with the oil majors and energy companies. One option is hydrogen, another option is ammonia, another option is methanol. Now, all three options have, of course, the pros and cons. The transition itself is complicated because, again, you have this existing fleet of ships and you need to either retrofit them or you need to build new ships from scratch. At the same time, you also have to deal with the supply side. If you are a ship owner or a ship operator, what you really care about is whether you have your supply wherever you go with your ship. So of course, at the moment, if we talk about LNG, we can say that there is an acceptable supply network, more or less all over the world. Whereas for hydrogen, ammonia, and methanol, obviously we are ages away from having that. So we expect to see some changing trends over the next few years. We do expect to see a concentration on one of these three options, and we expect this to be driven mostly by the demand side. Of course, the big shipping companies will be the ones sort of driving the change and being at the forefront, but it is a change that really involves every company in the industry, and the shipping industry compared to other industries really one where every player is really linked to the other, and so you cannot really implement the change in isolation. You need the entire chain to kind of play along. So I'm equally excited to be part of the conversation and the discussion, and looking forward to questions.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, to Alberto and the Italian Chamber of Commerce for inviting me and for organizing this wonderful forum. My name is Guyun Chung, and I am responsible for business development in the Asia Pacific region for Enel Green Power. And Enel Green Power is a division within the Enel Group that is responsible for the development and the operation of renewable energy power plants. And Enel, as most of you might know, is the Italian power utility, which I'm sure many of the audience will be proud to know that it is now one of the largest private utilities. And in terms of renewable capacity alone, we are the largest renewable operator in the world. If you set aside some of the large Chinese state-owned companies. It's very interesting that this seminar was organized in a way that we are proceeding from coal to natural gas to shipping, and then the expectation is for me to talk about renewables, where the theme is decarbonization. And I'll have to say Enel actually is a company that has been doing all of the above. So not only coal, gas, but even, as Alberto mentioned, nuclear. Even we even had investments into coal production as well as natural gas drilling, which we have divested over the years. So I think the evolution of Enel in the past 15 years is a microcosm of what's happening in the world today in the energy sector. And as many of you may know, Enel had made this decision to really focus on renewables since about 15 years ago. And we have been really been proud of our growth into where we are today, where our installed capacity, just to give you an idea, globally is about 46 gigawatts. And for those of you who don't know what a gigawatt means, a gigawatt, give or take, is about a nuclear power plant. And Italy's total installed capacity is about 110 gigawatts. So just to give you an idea, that's how much of renewables we're operating today. And our goal by the end of this decade is to triple that capacity to about 150 gigawatts. And we think we are well on track to achieve that goal. But before I go into talking more about decarbonization, I think there are two other very broad trends that is important to know to understand what's happening in the world. And they are not necessarily directly linked to decarbonization. One is, and this was something that was mentioned by Filippo, is electrification. So we're seeing a lot of industries and a lot of energy use in general being electrified. As Filippo mentioned, not only in the residential heating and cooking, but in many of the industrial sectors. And the big game changer that everybody's witnessing today is in the transportation sector with the electrification of the vehicle fleet. And the penetration of electric vehicles is only going to accelerate. And we think that by the end of the decade, it's going to be well over half of the installed base of the transportation fleet could well be electrified. Now, this will be finally marrying the two big sectors of the energy sector, one being electricity and the other being transport, kind of now finally being merged into one, that I think now it becomes a single, I would say, bound, quote unquote, energy industry. And so, you know, electricity is a means of carrying energy, which tends to be the most efficient because your energy loss over long distances, when you're talking about high voltage transmission lines, is very low. And also, if the energy that is powering the electricity becomes greener, then by definition, electrification also means decarbonization. And electricity, if it's being sourced by renewable sources that are by definition local, then it also should be enhancing energy security. So electrification, the way that it's happening today, and and when this trend towards more renewable energy and more locally sourced energy spreads, I think this is going to be going hand in hand with decarbonization. The other trend that I think we should keep in mind is digitalization. Now, digitalization, everything from the more ubiquitous use of algorithms, of sensors, of just having more automation and computer assisted systems that are introduced into our grids is already revolutionizing how we consume and how we produce energy. Just to give you an example, in Italy in the early 2000s, when there was a very high government subsidy for rooftop solar, there was a boom in rooftop solar in residentials. I'm sure most of you will remember everybody placing solar panels on their roofs or on their patios. And we observed on our grids in Italy, where our grids were designed for high voltage lines to be bringing electricity into the mid to low voltage lines going into the residential sectors. And in the span of 2 to 3 years, there was a reverse of that energy flow where the energy was actually going the other direction. Now, that would have created havoc if it hadn't been for, I would have to say, an almost unrelated decision that Enel had made at the time, to install digital meters into our grids. We would love to take credit for that, but we actually did it for a slightly different motivation. But it turned out that having that digital meters installed into our grid, and equally important, introducing automation into our substations, actually allowed the grid to handle the electrical flows to where it needed to go. So we had electricity flowing out of the houses and into the places in the industrial sectors where the energy was needed. Now, that kind of digitalization helps our grids be smarter. And to Giacomo's point, it helps, and also to Filippo's point about intermittency, it helps the electricity grid to cope with these kinds of changes introduced into our grid. To be fair, our grid was not designed to do this. It was an old copper wire system to bring in electricity from very far away places, coal plants, hydro plants, and then to transport that electricity to where the population were. And now power plants are being built everywhere, and some in very small capacities. And so for our grids to be able to absorb that, it has to be digitalized. And thankfully, we have that technology today. So electrification and digitalization is actually happening at the precisely right moment when we had this mandate to decarbonize. What this allows is for a lot of different players to come in. Just to give you an idea, Enel Green Power is the largest player in the world in renewables, but our global share of that marketplace is only 2%, 3%. So you can imagine how fragmented the space is, and this market is only going to grow furthermore exponentially. So there's a lot of room to play, and I think the hardware that these power utilities bring to the fore in terms of the grid and in terms of their installed capacity, if it's done right, it allows for other market players to actually come in and to play in this market. Which is why in Enel, what we are doing is what our approach to the business is to create this platform that will be able to invite many different players to come in. Just to give you an example, on the electric vehicles, we are enabling our grids to introduce more smarter electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And we're also introducing different kinds of services that allow demands to be more flexible in responding to peak demand instances. So if there's one thing that I would like for the audience to take away, is that decarbonization is happening with electrification and digitalization.
Thanks, Guyun, and thank you very much, Alberto, Giacomo, Filippo, Timothy, and Guyun again. It is really very interesting and exciting to hear from all of you industry leaders and industry experts about the developments and the revolution of the energy industry. Let me just take a few seconds to present myself. My name is Massimiliano Bondurri. I am the founder and CEO of SGMC Capital. We're a multifamily office based here in Singapore who cater to the ultra high net worth families and institutions. As I was saying, it is very interesting to hear all of this because the theme that we're talking about is extremely relevant. It is probably fair to say that is one of the main challenges that our current generation is facing when we look at the environment, but overall look at the efficiency with respect to the energy sources that we currently have. And being such a relevant topic, of course, a number of our global investors are asking us, how can we actually take exposures to the theme while at the same time being mindful of all the environment that we're currently in and therefore being mindful of the environment overall? Well, as we have seen just now and as these experts have already outlined, there's definitely a lot of change, structural change, which is happening in the industry. And wherever there is change, there is opportunity. But in order to be able to take that opportunity, we first need to understand why that change is happening. Now, if we probably had to summarize, there will be two main factors why we're seeing all of this. One is driven by social and political reasons. Therefore, people throughout the globe nowadays have a lot more access to information, are much more knowledgeable, are aware of what is happening. And with respect to the environment and the energy theme overall, you've also had a number of very high profile individuals really putting this theme at the forefront of everything which is happening. And that is obviously being taken in the newspapers and gathering a lot of headlines. Clearly, when that happens, then governments need to take a stance, need to start doing something. Obviously, there's been the Paris Agreement, but also if you look a little bit more in the practical side, the European Union and the US and Asia to a lower extent have already agreed to a number of very important fiscal packages and fiscal stimulus, as well as a number of subsidies for reducing basically everything which is the carbon emissions, and just in order to make sure that the energy is going to become more efficient. This is probably going to become even more relevant in the US, where Biden, under his presidency, has clearly made the environment one of his key topics. And then, of course, there's also the side from the investors, because in a world where liquidity is abundant, at the end of the day, money is more or less free because interest rates are at zero or negative throughout most of the developed world, then it is not enough for a company or an institution to show that you're making a profit in order to gather flows from global investors. Investors nowadays, they want more. Investors are becoming increasingly sophisticated, increasingly aware of what is happening, and they want to make an impact, the so-called impact investing. And as such, then automatically companies throughout the world will need to adjust themselves and make sure that what is required from the investor is going to be taken into considerations in order to keep gathering those flows. Now that we have seen all of that, then the question then becomes, great, but how do I put all of this within a portfolio? So looking from an investment side, from a market side, because of course, we would like to take the opportunity and make a little bit of investment returns. Well, first of all, let me tackle the liquid market. There are a number of opportunities in the private equity and the venture capital space, but those are a bit illiquid. So let's just focus on the liquid markets. Now, if I had to summarize, we would advise a diversified approach, which would be made up of a core portfolio of solid names providing good dividend yields and a number of satellite strategies on the side, a little bit more risky, but of course with a higher potential of returns in the future. Let's read down a little bit with respect to each one of these. Now, your core portfolio would probably be made up of the more, I would say, traditional oil and gas and energy names, which provide a very solid balance sheet, which provide years and years of track record, which also provide a very interesting dividend yield. Because if you look at the stocks from some of these names, you're looking at anything between 3 to 6% on average. And that's extremely interesting in a low to zero interest rate environment. In addition to that, valuations are not stretched because, of course, once COVID hit, valuations have been hit as well. And it does provide some capital appreciation potential, especially in the short to medium term, because of this whole reopening trade. Now, the reopening trade that probably a lot of you have been hearing is simply related to the fact that global investors are becoming increasingly optimistic with respect to the fact that we will eventually be able to manage this virus. And once the virus is managed, then it means that the economies will be able to reopen. When that happens, there's going to be more demand for transportation. There's going to be more demand for flying around, more demand in general for the economies overall, which is then going to translate into demand for energy. But demand for energy that can be supplied now. As we have seen, there's a difference in what can be done now and what eventually we hope to be able to do in the future. So investing in a pocket of those more traditional names, which of course have also been taking into consideration all of the aspects that we're saying, therefore also evolutionizing themselves, definitely provides a very good core for the portfolio. Now, if we look at the satellite strategies, here's really where you want to build your alpha. So create that additional return. And in order to do that, we have to try and look at who are going to be the future winners in this sector, in this industry. And of course, it's hard to give a precise and definite answer today, but definitely there are some hints and there are a number of Of course, we think it's still not ripe enough at the moment. This could be a strategy and a technology which in the future could revolutionize even more the industry. Therefore, taking some these kind of names, we definitely think is extremely attractive. Clearly, it's not for the faint of heart. Volatility will definitely be higher, but at the same time, the potential growth in the future and potential returns are extremely interesting. Then, obviously, we have to look at the wind and solar energy. and names, which mostly thanks to the huge fiscal stimulus that we're seeing throughout the globe, as well as the number of subsidies, will remain supported. So those kind of names definitely should be part of a satellite strategy in a diversified portfolio. And investors can even take a look at some of the ETFs, which provides, again, a diversified exposure to this theme. And then finally, electricity and electrification, as we've been hearing a lot right now. Probably here, obviously, everyone is looking at Tesla, where valuations are pretty stretched already. But it's not only Tesla. It can be NIO, it can be Geely, it can be Volkswagen. We do not advise in chasing the current rally. This being said, there would be an opportunity should we see a meaningful correction to enter. And keep in mind that electricity is not only Tesla, it's not only cars, it's a lot. It's definitely everything that revolves around it. How do we really get that energy out? And there's a number of players, even still in the small and medium cap, which believe offer an incredible risk-reward opportunity for investors that are willing to take that risk. Therefore, summarizing, taking an exposure to this theme while at the same time being mindful of the environmental impact would require a bit of a core portfolio of more solid and dividend yielding names and a number of pocket strategies, which could be the future winners of the energy industry. Now, I think with that, we can now open the floor to your questions. And we're going to be taking the conversation now among all of us. Let me just open up and see if we're having any questions. So the first question that we are receiving is the following. Now, what is the difference between electricity and hydrogen as energy carriers? So I think you're probably going to be more technical than me on that one. So
go ahead. I can start, but please take over. Okay, well, hydrogen is, of course, a very hot topic. I think it's been mentioned by probably all of us. Very complicated. There is obviously lots going on in the hydrogen space. Maybe it's useful to just mention what hydrogen is and how it is produced. So hydrogen is, as we probably all know, the most widely available gas in the world. I mean, it's in air, and we can. It's very let's say efficient to extract and to use as energy. But however, the problem is that there is a huge cost related to it right now, in particular when we're talking about hydrogen linked to renewable production. So when we are, the most focus right now of the industry is in relation to green hydrogen, which is linking renewable sector. So in that case, it would be reconverted to electricity through a fuel cell. In other cases, it would be directed to the industrial sector. So basically replacing coal or natural gas in some very high in processes which require very, very high temperatures, such as the steel industry, for example. But that's not the end of it. I mean, there are companies looking at using it in the power sector, especially in Japan, where the biggest electricity provider in Japan is looking at combining gas and actually ammonia and coal and ammonia and gas and hydrogen into its processes. However, gas turbines right now, they can only accept around 2 to 3% of hydrogen in their systems. These players are looking to expand this up to 20 or 30%. But in any case, you cannot, let's say, completely replace the coal and the gas in these systems. So there's a number of challenges, of course, related to hydrogen. So we said this is a very complicated process, and already, the efficiency of converting electricity into hydrogen and then reusing that hydrogen to produce power or energy is one issue. I think you end up with around, let's say, with the first process 70%, but you end up with around 30% of the energy you originally started with. So that's already that's right, but it's very widely available, right? So potentially it's limitless, no? So it's clearly.
So just to add to what Filippo was saying, so hydrogen is widely available, but it's a highly volatile gas in the sense that it's never in its own form naturally. It has to be combined with some other molecule. So the problem is in splitting those molecules to free the hydrogen to be used for industrial purpose, as a gas for industrial purposes or for power generation. And so it's easier to think of it as a storage medium, like a battery. And in fact, in NL we are using, in NL we are using hydrogen fuel cells. We're using hydrogen fuel cells in very remote places where it's very difficult to get energy otherwise. Now, Filippo mentioned a very interesting point, a very important point about currently how the process of electrolysis is not only expensive, but huge, but very inefficient to be gaining it, to be splitting water into hydrogen to then be used again for generation. There's a round trip efficiency that just doesn't make any sense. So in the current context, it probably makes sense for doing electrolysis for the hydrogen production to be used for industrial purposes. Now, as Alberto mentioned, as you mentioned, Max, in Europe, there's a lot of stimulus budget being allocated for what's called green hydrogen, which is the production of hydrogen using renewables, which, as Filippo mentioned, is very costly. But that kind of government investment should surely bring that price down. So once that happens, then it can really become a competitive use of hydrogen, probably as a storage more than as a, say, as a. And it's important not to treat hydrogen as electricity. Hydrogen is a medium in which electricity could be created. I think that's the better way to think about it.
So again, we're still a few years away before we actually see that the hydrogen development, and obviously it shows up in the valuations and how now that everyone wants energy now, you're seeing the more traditional names going up and actually hydrogen names having quite a bit of a correction. But I think obviously if governments do what they can, just as you have very correctly outlined and highlighted, then maybe it puts the initial cost maybe a little bit lower so that infrastructures and everything has to be developed can be developed in order for these, especially the green hydrogen, potentially taking over in terms of a little bit of additional percentage of clean power.
And not only Europe, I should say also China and Japan are also heavily investing in this sector. So things will probably be changing very quickly in this area.
Max, maybe it's right because we delved into green hydrogen straight away, but it's true that hydrogen is being produced today, and actually we in Italy we're probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, producer of hydrogen, which we use in our refineries, but it's produced from gas, right? So it's produced through steam reforming, and so this is a so-called gray hydrogen, and let's say there is the intermediate color in the, let's say, color palette of hydrogen, which is blue hydrogen. So you've got the gray, the blue, and the green. And the blue is actually hydrogen which is produced through steam reforming. Okay, so through gas. The original molecule is a gas molecule, and then associated to the production process is a carbon capture storage process. So whereby you extract the carbon molecules from the gas to produce the hydrogen, and you place these carbon molecules in a storage, either underground in an old depleted reservoir, which is what we have a lot of. You know, we have a lot of gas and oil and gas reservoirs which we use as potentially as carbon capture plants, and or through other means, which is a very let's say talked about topic within the industry. So hydrogen is being produced. It's just a very small fraction of the energy space today, but as Guillaume said, we are all working on it, and we all think that it can be certainly one of the key elements to the energy transition. Perfect.
If I can add something, it's more a question than a comment. Is like the advantage of hydrogen is we will be able to use all the gas infrastructure to use hydrogen in the future, no? Because at the end you can liquefy hydrogen, even if the temperature will be much lower, no, than LNG.
Something like that, yeah.
So it's very difficult, at least.
Less.
Yeah. So the pipeline will be used also. So that's also that could be very interesting on that side, no?
I think, well, that's definitely right. I mean, there's a lot of people working on it. Now it's difficult to say exactly how this will work out. But I mean, what we know for a fact is that in Italy, Snam has done it. They have inserted a small portion of hydrogen within the Italian gas pipeline. And this, I think, was one of the first tests done in the world. I don't know. And it was basically delivering blended gas plus hydrogen into some specific customers of theirs. Now, I mean, I've read a little bit about it, but it's a very, very broad topic, and there's not a lot of certainty around this. There's potentially also technologies where you could transport gas and hydrogen together and then separate them at the end. But I mean, this is, I guess this is just a possibility. I don't know how actually how realistic it is to see it in practice. But certainly the blending aspect is something that, as we said before, in Japan, they're definitely working on from an end use. And theoretically, if you build the demand, then you should, the infrastructure should follow. Although it would be nice for them to go hand in hand, so the demand doesn't have to wait for the infrastructure. But it's something that is being definitely talked about. In terms of the liquefaction, I think it's very. It's more a question of competencies than of processes, in the sense that we as an industry, all us integrated majors who are used to handling, LNG primarily, but also oil and other commodities, and handling very complex industrial projects, we are, gearing ourselves to be able to deal with the next type of project. Now, whether this includes, a huge hydrogen production process with a liquefaction train attached to it, with shipping of the hydrogen, this is something that we would be definitely ready to do. It's just a prosecution of our job, right? And the same goes for carbon capture, right? So we've been extracting oil and gas for all our history from the subsurface, and what we're doing now is looking to put the carbon back into the subsurface. And these are our reservoirs. These are reservoirs that we know very well. So it's the same competences. It's the same type of let's say it's a progress in technology, but it's within the same industry. Certainly, it's the prosecution of the industry.
Perfect. And I think we have time for one last question. It's a little bit more Singapore centric, so that's quite interesting too. So the question is IMO and decarbonization, especially with respect to ocean transportation. Now, how is Singapore economy preparing to meet that challenge? And if you have any special remarks about that.
Maybe I can.
I guess this is for you.
Despite my voice, I think I can. So certainly, Singapore has been pushing hard to be at the forefront on this topic. As usual, the port of Singapore is the biggest in the world for fuel. That in the industry is called as known as bunkers. Just to give you an idea. Year, you have about 50 million tons of fuel being sold in Singapore, which is the biggest in the world, as I mentioned. The second in the ranking is Fujairah in the UAE, and that's about 8 million tons per year. So there's a huge difference between Singapore and basically every other port. So whatever Singapore decides to do has a big impact on the entire industry. Singapore has been surprisingly a little bit behind in terms of LNG. Because the Port Authority has awarded 2 licenses, the first one to a consortium of Shell and Keppel, and another one to Pavilion. And this was done about 3 years ago. And then they just now released another license to Total. Now, in Singapore, you have at the moment only one LNG bunkering vessel, whereas in Northern Europe, in Rotterdam, for example, you have about 10. So, of course, If you look at those numbers, you can see how Singapore is a little bit behind on the LNG side. At the same time, what we see is that, of course, there's increased interest on that. And actually, just recently, there was a test done by Shell together with Oldendorff Carriers, which is a big ship owner, with the fuel cells. So a lot of the tests that are happening in the industry, let's see a collaboration of a government agency on one side, a ship owner on the other side, and a major on the other side, are currently happening in Singapore. So certainly Singapore is facilitating this. Singapore and the Port Authority want to be at the forefront, but to be completely honest, they're coming a little bit from behind compared to Northern Europe, for example, that has been pushing quite hard on these topics for a number of years. There's a lot of interest as well in how they can combine the digitalization process with, of course, the refueling business. And we see a lot of subsidies being given by the Port Authority and by the Singaporean government. Right now, we are during Singapore Maritime Week. We have a number of meetings and conferences going on within industry players, and definitely this is basically the only topic that is being talked about.
Perfect. So again, I would like to thank so much Alberto and the Italian Chamber of Commerce here in Singapore, and especially all of you here. It's definitely been extremely interesting for me. I've learned a lot, and I hope all of you watching have found this very interesting as well.